Before the courthouse clerk called the next case, before the fluorescent lights above the waiting bench flickered and settled into their low electric hum, a woman in a gray coat pressed her palm against the curve of her stomach and whispered something only she could hear. Please, just stay still a little longer. Just until the papers are signed. Just until this is done. Across the hallway, a man who had not been afraid of anything in 22 years felt his chest tighten in a way he could not explain. Her name was Yerin Shin. She was 31 years old. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a loose knot, held by a plain black band that had lost its elasticity months ago. Her face carried the pale quality that comes from exhaustion settled deep into the bones. She wore a gray wool coat that no longer closed at the front, a navy blue dress she had owned for 6 years, and black flats cracked along the inside where her heel had worn through the lining. In her left hand, she held a manila folder with every document her attorney had asked her to bring. In her right hand, she held a small white envelope with her name written on the front in her own handwriting. She was 8 months pregnant, and she had come alone to finalize the divorce that would end a marriage that had almost ended her. The courthouse sat on the east side of the district of Bomun, 3 blocks from the river, wedged between a closed department store and a parking garage that leaked in the winter. The marble floors had been polished so many times they had gone soft in the middle of every hallway, worn down by people who came to end things. The courthouse did not begin things. It finished them. Yerin sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom 4 with her folder on her lap. Her breathing counted to the rhythm her midwife had taught her. In through the nose for 4. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 6. She had been doing it for 20 minutes because the baby was pressing against something that made her dizzy when she stood too fast, and because counting her breath was the only thing keeping her from counting the reasons she was about to sign away the last 5 years of her life. 20 feet down the hallway, a man in a charcoal suit stood near the window with his back to the room. His name was Dason Moon. He was 59 years old. His hair was iron gray, cut short, brushed back from a forehead that had been lined by decisions most men would not survive. His hands rested in the pockets of his coat. He had come to the building that morning for a quiet conversation with a judge about a matter of property, and he had been on his way out when something had stopped him. He did not know what it was at first. A sound, a shape at the edge of his vision. A feeling he had not felt since he was a boy in the city of Incheon, watching his mother press a wet cloth against her own mouth to keep from crying out loud. He turned, and he saw her. A woman on a bench, alone, 8 months pregnant, holding a folder and an envelope, and breathing in a pattern that only a person under extraordinary pressure would have to think about. Her left hand rested on her stomach. Her right hand was trembling. Dason Moon, who had built an organization that employed over 400 men across 2 countries, who had sat across from governors and men whose names grown adults lowered their voices to say in restaurants, felt something rise in his chest he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Recognition. Not of her face. He had never seen her before. Recognition of the posture, the controlled breath. The shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to take up less space than her body required. He did not move. He watched as a door at the end of the hallway opened, and a man in a black overcoat stepped out. Tall. Expensive watch. He looked at the woman on the bench the way a man looks at a piece of furniture he has already sold. He stood 3 feet away, pulled out his phone, and began to type. Yerin did not look up. She had learned that looking at him made it worse. She kept her eyes on the envelope and counted her breaths. The man finished typing. He looked down at her stomach. And then he said, loud enough for the entire hallway to hear, "You know that thing isn't mine, right? Just so we're clear before we go in there." Yerin did not flinch. She had heard worse. She closed her eyes, tightened her fingers around the envelope, and let the words slide past her. But 20 feet away, Dyson Moon did not move. except for his hands, which had quietly closed into fists inside the pockets of his coat. And somewhere deep in the hallway where the marble had gone soft from 1,000 endings, a bell rang above the courtroom door, and a voice called the next case, and Yerin Shin stood slowly, one hand still pressed to her stomach, and began to walk toward the door that would end the worst 5 years of her life. She did not know yet that the man by the window had already decided he was not going to let her walk through it alone, even if she never learned his name. The district of Bamoon in late autumn had a particular quality of light that softened every edge and made the city look like it was remembering itself from a long time ago. The trees along the boulevard outside the courthouse had lost most of their leaves. The ones that remained hung like torn paper from the branches, rustling in a wind that carried the smell of the river 3 blocks away. The courthouse sat inside a square of buildings that had once been the commercial heart of the district, and were now mostly empty. The department store to the east had closed 18 months ago. The bank to the south had become a weekend coffee shop. The old post office had been boarded up for 2 years. Only the courthouse remained active. Only the courthouse still had something to do. Inside, the hallways were lined with long wooden benches installed decades ago. The wood was scarred by the weight of people who had waited for their names to be called. Faint indentations along the edges mapped the shape of human anxiety across years. The air smelled of paper, of floor polish, of coffee brewed in the small room behind the metal detectors, and of something older that might have been the smell of the building itself slowly giving up. Yeren had been inside this courthouse twice before. The first time, 6 months ago, she had come alone to file the initial petition. She had come because she had needed to see the inside of the building. She had needed to know this was a real place where real people ended real marriages. She had needed the ending to feel possible. The second time, 4 months ago, she had come for a preliminary hearing her husband had not attended. His attorney had requested a delay. She had walked out that afternoon with the disorienting feeling of having prepared for a battle that did not happen. She had sat in her car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before she had felt steady enough to drive home. And now, today, in the last week of November, she had come for the third and final time. She had come to sign the papers that would dissolve the legal entity of her marriage and release her from the man who had spent 5 years teaching her that love was a contract of obedience, and that obedience was measured in silence. She had come 8 months pregnant because the timing had not been kind. The baby had been conceived during a week in early spring when her husband had returned from a business trip with flowers and apologies and promises that had lasted exactly 11 days before his hands had found her face again. She had not known she was pregnant when she had filed. She had learned 6 weeks later on a bathroom floor in a studio apartment on the other side of the city. Her attorney, Hari Jong, had explained the choice clearly. She could wait to finalize. But every additional month of marriage meant another month her husband's name would remain legally tied to the child growing inside her. The fastest path to safety was to sign now, before the baby arrived, and walk out of the courthouse as a woman whose child would be born into a legal landscape that reflected the truth. So she had come, 8 months pregnant, in a gray coat that no longer closed, on a bench that had held 1,000 endings. And somewhere in the hallway behind her, a man she did not know was watching her, with the careful stillness of someone who had just recognized something he had spent 40 years trying to forget. Yeren Shin had not always been the woman sitting on the bench outside courtroom 4. 6 years ago, before any of this, she had been a graphic designer at a small publishing house in the arts district. She had worked on book covers. She had loved her job in the uncomplicated way people love their jobs at 25, when they still believe the shape of their life is being drawn by their own hand. She had shared an apartment with a college friend named Sumin. She had owned a second-hand bicycle she rode along the river path every morning. She had kept a pot of basil on her windowsill and had managed, against all predictions, to keep it alive 3 summers in a row. She had met him at a gallery opening. She did not think about that night often, because thinking about it required her to remember the version of herself who had walked into the gallery in a red sweater and had laughed easily. Every time she met that version of herself, she wanted to reach through time and grab her by the shoulders and tell her to turn around and walk out the door. She had not turned around. She had accepted his business card, his dinner invitation. Over the course of 8 months, a patient campaign of attention that had felt, at the time, like being chosen. He was older. He worked in finance. His family name meant something in certain circles. He had bought her a ring too heavy for her finger, and she had worn it anyway because she had thought the weight was what love felt like when it was serious. They had married in a ceremony she had not planned. Suman had been the only person on her side she had actually wanted there. Her parents had come down from the northern countryside, and her mother had cried. And Yaren had thought at the time that her mother was crying from joy. She had not learned until much later that her mother had been crying because she had seen something in the groom's eyes that Yaren had not been ready to see. The first hit had come 11 months into the marriage. A slap, open-handed, in the kitchen, because she had forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. She had stood with her hand against her cheek and had not cried. He had apologized within the hour. He had brought her flowers the next morning. He had promised, with tears in his own eyes, that it would never happen again. It had happened again 4 months later. And then again, 2 months after that. The pattern tightened the way a rope tightens when you pull both ends, until the distance between incidents had shortened from months to weeks, and the spaces in between filled with smaller cruelties. The insults disguised as jokes, the criticisms of her friends until she stopped seeing them, the comments about her family until she stopped calling them, the slow, patient removal of every person who might have told her that what was happening was not normal. She had tried to leave twice before. The first time she had gone to Suman's apartment at 2 in the morning. She had stayed 6 days before he had called and cried and promised. And she had gone back, because she had not yet understood that promises from men like him were not the beginning of change, but the beginning of the next cycle. The second time she had made it 3 weeks in a small room above a bakery across the city. He had shown up with flowers and had stood in the street outside her window for 6 hours, not knocking, not calling, just standing there. And she had come down eventually because she had been more afraid of what he would do if she did not come down than of what would happen when she did. The third time she had left had been 9 months ago. This time she had not gone back. She had moved into a studio apartment in a neighborhood where he did not know anyone. She had changed her phone number. She had filed the paperwork. She had found a therapist through the legal aid referral and had started, slowly and painfully, the work of remembering who she had been before him. And then the home test had turned positive. She had sat on the bathroom floor for 2 hours that morning, holding the stick in her hand, because the baby inside her had not asked to be part of this story. The baby inside her had not chosen its father. The baby was simply alive, and small, and real, and hers. She had placed her hand on her stomach and had whispered the first promise she had made to another person in 5 years. I am going to get us out. And now, 8 months later, on a bench outside courtroom 4, she pressed her hand against her stomach again and whispered it one more time. I am going to get us out. The clerk opened the door and called her name. Yaren Shin stood up. The courtroom was smaller than she had expected. 6 rows of wooden chairs facing a raised bench. A small table for each side. A window on the east wall painted shut. The judge was not yet seated. Hari gestured her toward the table on the left. Breathe, Hari said quietly. You are doing fine. Yaren sat. She placed her folder on the table. She placed the envelope on top. She placed her hands on top of the envelope. Across the aisle, her husband sat at his own table. He did not look at her. His attorney, a man named Woo Jin Bae, opened a laptop with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Her husband leaned back and checked his watch. He had always checked his watch when he wanted her to know that whatever she was saying was taking longer than it was worth. She looked down at her hands. She thought about the night that had finally made her leave. It had been a Thursday in early March. Rain falling in slow, straight lines without wind, so that every drop sounded distinct when it hit the window. She had been making soup at the stove, humming quietly, because the rain had reminded her of the town where she had grown up, and humming had been a habit she had inherited from her grandmother. Her husband had come home early. She had not expected him. He had walked into the kitchen behind her and said, "What are you humming?" She had startled. The wooden spoon had slipped from her hand into the pot, and a small splash of broth had jumped up onto the front of her shirt. Maybe a teaspoon. He had looked at the stain on her shirt, and then at the spoon in the pot, and then at her face, and something in his expression had shifted in the way it shifted when the temperature of the room was about to change. "You are so careless." "I am sorry, you surprised me. I should not have to announce myself in my own home." She had turned back to the stove. She had tried to lift the spoon out with a fork, and her hand had been trembling, and a little more broth had splashed, and he had taken one step forward and had grabbed her upper arm so hard his fingers had left 5 separate bruises she had counted the next morning in the mirror. He had turned her around. He had said, "I am going to teach you how to listen." What had happened next did not need to be remembered in detail. She had remembered it in detail for months, and her therapist had told her remembering was part of the work, and she had done the work. And now she remembered it the way a person remembers a room they used to live in. She remembered the shape of it. She did not need to walk through it anymore. What she remembered now was the moment afterward, lying on the kitchen floor with her face against the cold tile. The rain still falling in slow, straight lines, the soup still simmering. She had opened her eyes and had seen, with the quiet certainty of a mathematical equation, that her life was going to end if she did not leave. Not tonight, not next week, but eventually. He would kill her, and the police would come, and her mother would travel down from the northern countryside to identify her body. She had stood up from the floor. She had turned off the stove. She had walked past him in the doorway. He had been drinking water from the tap. He had not looked at her. She had walked into the bedroom and had pulled a bag out from under the bed, a bag she had packed 4 months earlier and had never used. 2 changes of clothes, her identification, a photograph of her mother, 300,000 won in cash that she had been saving from the grocery money for almost a year. She had walked out without her shoes on. She had taken a taxi in her socks to Suman's new apartment, and she had sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap, and she had not cried. She had simply watched the rain on the windows and had understood, with the same quiet certainty, that she was never going back. She had not gone back. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not the week after, when he had called her 47 times in a single day. Not 6 weeks after that, when the home test had turned positive. Hari had taken the case without charging the full fee. Hari had filed the protective order. Hari had built the documentation. Hari had warned her, months ago, that the final hearing would be the hardest day, because her husband would be in the room with her for the first time since she had left. "Just do not look back," Hari had said. "Whatever he does, whatever he says, and you do not owe him your eyes." Yeren had promised she would not look. The judge entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. The proceedings moved quickly at first. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with short silver hair and reading glasses she wore low on her nose. She reviewed the documents in a tone that suggested she had reviewed thousands of similar documents and had stopped finding any of them interesting a long time ago. She asked Hari to confirm the petitioner's identity. She asked Woo Jin Bae to confirm the respondent's identity. She asked whether both parties were present of their own free will. Yes, yes, yes. Then the judge looked up. Before we proceed to the signatures, I note that the petitioner is expecting a child. The record reflects that the respondent has contested paternity pending a test after the child is born. Is this agreement still in place? Hari stood. Your Honor, the petitioner has agreed to a post-birth test, the results of which will be binding on future custody and support matters. This agreement is documented in Section 14 of the settlement. Counselor Bay, is that your client's understanding? Woojin Bay stood. It is, Your Honor. Noted. The judge looked down at her papers, and in the small silence between her sentences, Yaren's husband leaned sideways in his chair and said, just loud enough for her to hear, but not for the microphones to catch. You are a disgrace. Yaren did not turn her head. Her attorney did not hear him. The judge did not hear him. But Yaren heard him, and the baby inside her shifted, as the baby had been shifting whenever her heart rate climbed too quickly. She pressed her hand against her stomach under the table. In through the nose for 4. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 6. She did not turn her head. Look at me, he said. She did not. You think this little performance makes you a victim? You walked out on me. You stole my money. You ran to your lawyer and made up stories. Her hand was shaking under the table. Her other hand was on the envelope on the folder. The envelope contained a letter she had written to the baby 6 weeks ago, on a night when she had not been able to sleep. She had brought it today because she had wanted something of her own in the room with her, something that belonged to her and to the baby and to no one else. The weight of it beneath her palm was the only thing keeping her steady. Look at me. She did not. The judge cleared her throat. Her husband sat back. The proceedings continued. Yaren did not know whether anyone else in the room had seen what had just happened, or whether she had been the only witness to it. She did not care, because she had survived it, and surviving it was the only thing that mattered. The papers were brought forward. Hari slid the first page across. Yaren picked up the pen. She signed her name on the line. She signed the second page. She signed the third. She signed 14 pages. On the last page she paused, because the last page carried the weight of all the others. She wrote her name in the same steady cursive her mother had taught her when she was 6 years old at the kitchen table in the northern countryside. The same cursive she had used to sign the marriage certificate 5 years earlier in a room that had smelled of lilies. When she lifted the pen, the marriage was over. The judge stamped the final page, the clerk made copies. Hari gathered the documents and handed Yaren a sealed envelope containing her copies. You did it. You can stand whenever you are ready. Yaren listened to her husband standing up at the other table. She listened to his attorney gathering his laptop. She listened to the sound of his footsteps walking toward the door. When the door opened and closed behind him, she exhaled for what felt like the first time in 5 years. The baby kicked. Once. Firmly. Against the inside of her ribs. It was not the first time the baby had kicked, but something about the timing of it, the exactness of it, made Yaren press both her hands against her stomach and close her eyes. For the first time since she had walked into the courthouse that morning, her composure broke, not into tears, but into a single short laugh that came from somewhere deep inside her chest, a sound she had not made in years, the sound of a woman who had just realized she was still alive. Hari touched her shoulder. Come on, let us go home. Yaren picked up her folder. She picked up her envelope. She stood slowly, one hand still on her stomach, and walked with Hari toward the door. When she stepped out into the hallway, she did not see her husband anywhere. What she saw instead was a man in a charcoal suit standing by the window at the far end of the corridor, his hands open at his sides now, his shoulders held at an angle she had not seen on any man in her life, an angle that suggested he had been standing there a very long time, and he had not moved, and he had been waiting for her to come through that door. She did not know who he was, But she knew, with the same quiet certainty she had known on the kitchen floor 9 months ago, that something was about to change. Dason Moon had not planned to still be in the courthouse. He had concluded his business with Judge Shin over an hour ago. The matter had taken 15 minutes. His driver had been waiting outside the entire hour. His phone had buzzed 3 times with messages from his second-in-command, a man named Hyun-woo Park, asking when the boss would return to the office. He had not answered. He had stood by the window and had watched a woman he did not know sit on a bench outside a courtroom he had no reason to care about, and he had not been able to leave. He knew why. He had known the moment he had heard the man in the black overcoat say the words about the child not being his. He had known the moment he had seen that the woman had not flinched. Flinching would have required her to still have the capacity to be surprised by cruelty, and she had not flinched, which meant cruelty had stopped surprising her a long time ago. Dason Moon knew what that looked like. His mother had been a woman named Mireille Moon, barely 5 feet tall. She had worked at a textile factory during the day and had cleaned offices at night. And between those 2 jobs, she had raised a son whose father had taught her, over the course of 18 years, that her opinions were not required and that her silence was the rent she paid for the roof over her head. Dason had grown up inside that silence. He had grown up watching his mother prepare meals with one eye on the door, listening for the sound of his father's footsteps in the stairwell, calibrating the temperature of the food and the arrangement of the dishes to the mood she could read in the rhythm of those footsteps, pressing cold cloths against her own cheek in the mirror before walking him to school so the other mothers would not see, smiling at neighbors, telling the landlord every month that everything was fine. She had not been fine. When Daesoon had been 17, he had come home one afternoon from his part-time job at a print shop and had found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the wall, and he had known the instant he had walked in the door that something had broken inside her that was not going to heal. She had said quietly, "I am tired, Daesoon. I am so tired." He had made her tea. He had sat with her. He had not known what to say. She had died 11 months later. The doctors had said her heart had simply given out. Dason had known it had been her heart, but not in the way the doctors had meant. Her heart had given out because it had been asked to hold too much for too long without ever being allowed to set any of it down. No one had come for her. No one had knocked on the door. No one had said, "You do not have to live like this." He had been 18 at the funeral. He had stood at her grave in the rain and had made a promise to a woman who could no longer hear him. The promise had shaped every decision he had made for the next 41 years. He had built his organization with that promise in mind, though he had not always admitted it to himself. He had risen through the ranks of a world that did not reward softness. He had accumulated power the way other men accumulated art. But beneath all of it, there had always been a single quiet conviction. Women like his mother existed behind every closed door. They existed in silence that was mistaken for peace, and the world, in Daesoon's experience, had arranged itself to ensure that women like his mother would continue to exist in exactly that way, for as long as no one with the resources to interrupt the pattern chose to interrupt it. He had the resources. He had never used them for this. He had never found a reason specific enough, a face particular enough, a situation that had pulled hard enough at the memory of his mother at the kitchen table saying she was tired. Until today. Until a woman in a gray coat had sat on a bench outside courtroom 4 with her hand on her stomach and her breath counted in a rhythm he had recognized from 40 years ago. He had sent a single message to Hyunwoo Park. "I need information on a divorce case in courtroom 4 today. The husband." Full background. Quietly. The reply had come within 90 seconds. Understood. The door of courtroom 4 opened. The husband came out first, alone, his phone already at his ear, his voice raised in the tone of a man who had just lost something he had not expected to lose. He walked past Daesoon without seeing him, because men like him rarely saw men like Daesoon until it was too late. 2 minutes passed. Then the door opened again, and the woman in the gray coat stepped out with her attorney beside her, and her hand was still on her stomach, and her eyes found Daesoon at the end of the corridor with the unerring precision of a person who had been scanning rooms for threats for so long that her instincts no longer made distinctions between men who meant her harm and men who meant her none at all. Daesoon did not move. He did not smile. He did not nod. He did not do anything that a man in a charcoal suit might have done to signal intention in a public hallway in a city where intention was often the first warning of danger. He simply stood still, and he let her decide whether to walk toward him or away from him. He already knew what he was going to offer her if she walked toward him. He did not yet know whether she would accept it, but he had not been able to help his mother. He was not going to fail twice. Yaren stopped walking. Harry, half a step ahead, turned. What is it? That man. By the window. He has been standing there the whole time. Hari studied the figure at the end of the corridor with the practiced eye of a woman who had spent 2 decades representing clients whose safety depended on her ability to read a hallway correctly. The suit. The posture. The stillness. The fact that he was not holding a phone, not reading anything, not doing any of the things men in courthouse hallways normally did to occupy themselves. Do you know him? No. Stay behind me. Hari began walking slowly toward the elevators, her body positioned between Yaren and the end of the corridor. Daesoon saw them begin to walk. He understood immediately what was happening. Any movement on his part in the next 15 seconds would confirm the attorney's assessment and shut down the possibility of a conversation permanently. He had one chance to signal his intentions clearly, without words. He did something he had not done in a public hallway in 30 years. He took his hands out of his pockets. He let them hang at his sides, open, palms visible. He took one step backward, away from the window, increasing the distance between himself and the women. And then he stopped and waited. Hari noticed. Hari had spent 20 years learning to read the difference between men who were positioning themselves to act and men who were positioning themselves to be read. The man at the end of the corridor had just, without saying a word, told her he was not a threat. She slowed. They reached the elevators. She pressed the button. In the 3 or 4 seconds before the elevator arrived, the man at the end of the corridor spoke, just loudly enough to carry, in a voice lower and calmer than Yaren had expected. I do not want to alarm you. My name is Daesoon Moon. I was in this building on another matter today, and I saw something I could not walk away from. I would like to offer a single conversation in a public place of your choosing, with your attorney present. If you do not want that conversation, I will leave now, and you will never see me again. The elevator doors opened. Hari did not step inside. I am going to ask you some questions, she said. You are going to answer them directly. Yes. How long have you been standing in this hallway? 1 hour and 12 minutes. Why? Daesoon looked past her to Yaren and spoke to Yaren directly, because the question had been Hari's, but the answer belonged to the woman in the gray coat. Because I heard the man outside the courtroom say that the child you are carrying is not his, and the way you did not react told me that you have been hearing things like that for a very long time. I am in a position to make sure that what comes next for you is not what came next for someone I knew a long time ago. That is the reason. I am not asking for anything from you. I am asking if you will let me offer something. The elevator doors began to close. Hari reached out and held them. This is your call, she said to Yaren. Completely. Yaren studied the man's face, lines around the eyes that suggested a lifetime of watching rooms carefully. Hands held deliberately open. No phone, no papers, A man who was waiting for an answer with the patience of someone who had already accepted the answer might be no. One conversation, she said. With Hari. In a public place. Now. Dae-soon inclined his head slightly. There is a tea house across the street. It is owned by a woman named Seon-young-ha. I will walk ahead. You can follow at whatever distance you prefer. If at any point you change your mind, you can turn around. We will follow, Hari said. At a distance. He turned and walked toward the stairs at the far end of the corridor. He did not take the elevator. He had never liked them. When he had disappeared into the stairwell, Hari exhaled and turned to Yerin. I need to tell you something. I recognized his name. From where? From a case I handled 11 years ago. A woman whose landlord had been harassing her. The harassment stopped. Very suddenly, after a meeting with someone whose name I did not know at the time. I know it now. It was him. Is he dangerous? He is powerful. He is not dangerous to you. How do you know? Because if he were, he would not have given us his real name. The elevator arrived again. They stepped inside. The doors closed, and Yerin pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the baby shift once, firmly, as if the baby understood that something in the shape of their lives had just changed and wanted to be counted as a witness to it. The tea house sat at the corner of a narrow alley 2 minutes from the courthouse, tucked between a shop that sold embroidered handkerchiefs and a shop that sold nothing anyone could identify from the street. Inside, the tea house was warm in a way that had nothing to do with heating. It came from the smell of roasted barley and ginger, from the low hum of a kettle that had been on the stove since before dawn. There were 6 tables. 2 were occupied. An old man in a brown cardigan read a folded newspaper by the window. 2 women in their 50s spoke in low voices at the back. The proprietor, a small woman with white hair pinned in a knot at the base of her neck, stood behind the counter arranging dried chrysanthemums in a glass jar. When Dae-sun entered, she looked up. Her face showed only acknowledgement, a small nod. She did not speak. The back table on the left, Dae-sun said. For 3. She nodded and turned to prepare a pot. Dae-sun did not sit down. He waited for Hari and Yerin to enter. When they did, he gestured to the 2 chairs facing the door. He had learned long ago that people who had survived what she had survived needed to see the entrance at all times. He took the chair with his back to the door. Yerin lowered herself into the chair slowly, one hand on the table for balance. Hari sat beside her. The proprietor brought 3 small cups and a clay pot of barley tea. She poured without speaking. She returned to her counter. Tell me what you want, Yerin said. She had decided in the elevator she would not waste time. Dae-sun nodded. I want to make sure that you and your child are safe. That is the entire thing I want. I have no interest in your story beyond what you choose to share. I have no interest in your husband beyond what is required to make sure he stops being a factor in your life. I am not asking for your gratitude, your friendship, or your trust. I am offering a structure of protection. What kind of structure? 3 things. A residence under a name that is not yours, for as long as you need it. A legal team beyond what you already have, because your husband is going to test the boundaries of the settlement in the next 90 days, and I have seen men like him do it 100 times, and a medical arrangement for the final month of your pregnancy and the delivery itself, so that you are not making those decisions based on what you can afford. Hari had not moved. She was measuring every word. Why? Yerin said. Dae-sun set his cup down. My mother's name was Mirai. She died when I was 18. She had been married to my father for 21 years. She had never left him. The doctors said her heart gave out. I know what killed her. She was killed by the accumulation of things she carried that no one helped her carry. I made a promise at her grave, when I was 18, that if I ever had the resources to interrupt that pattern for someone else, I would. I have had the resources for a long time. I have not, until today, found a situation specific enough to act on. He paused. You are not my mother. I am not asking you to be. I am asking you to let me keep a promise I made to her 41 years ago by making sure what happened to her does not happen to you. Yaren did not speak for a long moment. Tell me what you do for a living. I run an organization. It operates across the southern part of this country and has offices in 2 other countries. It has legitimate businesses, of which I own several. It has a reputation that has been carefully cultivated, and that reputation is useful in situations like yours, because men like your husband understand reputation in a way they do not understand the law. Are you a criminal? I am a businessman whose business has, at various points, operated in the margins of the law. I have not been convicted of anything. I have not done anything in the last 15 years that I would be ashamed to tell my mother about. Is this something you have offered other women? No. You are the first. Yaren looked at Hari. Harry placed her hand flat on the table. What he is offering is real. The residence will be real. The legal team will be real. The medical arrangement will be real. There will be no invoice. There will be no debt. I have seen him arrange things for people who never learned his name and walk away without ever collecting. He is telling you the truth. Yaren closed her eyes. She placed both her hands on her stomach. She thought about the studio apartment across the city, with the single window that faced an air shaft and the door whose lock had been installed in 1987. She thought about the hospital bill she had been dreading. She thought about the fact that her husband's family had already made 2 phone calls to her obstetrician. She opened her eyes. There is something I need you to know. His family has money. His father sits on the board of a company you probably know. If they find out someone like you is involved, they will push back. Daesun almost smiled. The expression did not quite reach his eyes, but it was there. I know who his father is. His father knows who I am. His father is not going to push back. How can you be sure? Because his father's company signed a contract with one of my companies 6 years ago, and the contract contains a clause that would be very inconvenient for his son if his son ever became aware of it. His family is not going to involve itself in this. I am telling you that with more certainty than I am usually willing to express. Yaren stared at him. You knew who he was before you walked over here? I confirmed his identity in the hallway. It did not change my decision. It changed my confidence in the outcome. The tea in her cup had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Outside the window, the autumn afternoon had deepened into a gray shading toward blue. And Yaren Shin, 8 months pregnant, divorced for 47 minutes, sitting in a tea house that smelled of roasted barley and ginger, looked across the table at a man she had met 20 minutes ago and said the word she had not expected to say. Yes. Daesun Moon did not celebrate the word. He nodded once, took his phone from his inner pocket, and stood. I am going to step outside for 4 minutes. I need to make 2 phone calls. I will not leave the front of the tea house. Go, Hari said. He left. Through the window, Yaren could see him on the narrow sidewalk, his phone to his ear. He spoke with the economy of a man who had spent his adult life making sure phone calls did not waste anyone's time. Harry turned to Yaren. How are you feeling? I do not know. That is a reasonable answer. Did I just agree to something I do not understand? You agreed to let a man with significant resources take 3 specific actions on your behalf. Those actions are real, they are actionable, and they are exactly what you need right now. You did not sign anything. If at any point you change your mind, we will walk away. He is not going to ask for anything in return? He has already told you what he is asking for. He is asking for the right to keep a promise to his mother. That is the transaction. Yaren looked down at her hands. She thought about her own mother. She had not called her in 18 months, not because she did not love her, but because she had been unable to tell her the truth of what her marriage had become, and she had not wanted to lie, so she had simply not called, and the silence had grown between them the way silence grows when neither side knows how to speak first. She pulled her phone from her bag. She opened her contacts. She scrolled to the entry that said, Mother. She held her thumb over the call button for a long moment. Then she put the phone back in her bag. Tomorrow, or the day after. But soon. The door opened. Daesoon returned and placed his phone face down on the table. The residence is on the 12th floor of a building in the district of Suwon. It is a serviced apartment. The lease is in the name of a holding company that is not connected to me on paper. The building has a security desk, a concierge, and a private elevator that requires a key card. The apartment has 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a window that faces east. The lease is paid through the end of next year. He paused. The additional counsel is a woman named Jiwon Seok, 62. She has practiced family law for 34 years. She will contact Hari tomorrow morning. Her role is to assist in anticipating and responding to any moves your husband or his family may make in the next 90 days. She is reinforcing Hari, not replacing her. Hari's expression did not change, but Yeren saw a small flicker in her eyes that told her Hari knew the name and approved. The medical arrangement is with a hospital in the district of Suwon, 3 blocks from the residence. Your obstetrician will be informed that your care is being transferred and will be given the option of continuing as your physician or referring you to someone at the new hospital. The delivery, whenever it happens, will be fully covered. Any complications, any additional care, any follow-up visits for you or the child are covered. You will never receive a bill. He paused again. The move can happen tonight. I have a car and a driver who can be at your current apartment within 30 minutes. This is your timeline. Yeren looked at Hari. Tonight, Hari said. The sooner she is in a building with a security desk, the better. Her husband knows her current address. Tonight, Yeren agreed. Daesoon picked up his phone. He sent a single message. The car will be at your apartment in 35 minutes. The driver's name is Junseo. He will call you from the lobby when he arrives. He will help you carry what you want to bring. The apartment is fully furnished. Yeren's eyes had filled. She had not expected them to. She had not cried once during the divorce proceedings. But now, sitting across from a man who was rearranging the next month of her life with the calm precision of someone who had been waiting 40 years to do exactly this, she felt the pressure behind her eyes she had been holding back for a very long time. She did not let the tears fall. Not yet. Thank you, she said. Daesoon did not reply immediately. You do not need to thank me, he said. I am the one who has been waiting for this. The apartment in Suwon was on the 12th floor of a building 6 years old. The entryway was small, but bright. The kitchen opened onto a living room with a low couch, a wooden coffee table, and an armchair in pale gray linen. The bedroom was through a door on the right. The second bedroom, smaller, held a daybed and a set of empty shelves. The window in the living room faced east. Junseo had carried up the 2 bags Yeren had packed at her old studio. He had handed her the key card and a printed card, with the building's emergency numbers and the concierge's line. He had bowed slightly and said, Mr. Moon wishes you a peaceful night. He had left. The door had closed. Yeren had locked it. She had turned the lock, and then the chain, and she had stood with her forehead pressed against the cool wood for a long moment, breathing the counted rhythm the midwife had taught her. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6. She had turned around. She had walked slowly through the apartment, taking in the quality of the silence. The refrigerator hummed softly. The heat whispered through vents in the baseboards. Somewhere far below, a single car horn sounded and then stopped. The apartment was quieter than any place she had slept in 5 years. She had walked into the main bedroom. The bed was large. The sheets were white. On the nightstand was a small basket containing a bottle of water, a packet of crackers, a banana, and a note, handwritten on a plain white card that said in clean block letters, "If you wake in the night, these are here. There is nothing you need to earn. Sleep." The handwriting was not Daesoon's. It did not matter. Someone had understood that a woman who had spent 5 years being punished for waking up hungry in her own home would need permission, in writing, to eat a cracker at midnight in a room that was now hers. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not cry yet. She walked into the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator because she had not yet believed it would be stocked. It was. Milk, eggs, fruit. A small container of rice porridge that she recognized as the kind her mother used to make when she was sick as a child. A bowl of seasoned spinach. A jar of pickled radish. A small bottle of prenatal vitamins. On the second shelf, a wrapped plate with a note that said, "Seon-young sent this. She said you did not eat enough at the tea house." Yeren sat down on the floor of the kitchen. The baby shifted, as the baby had been shifting all afternoon. She put both hands on her stomach. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since she had walked into the courthouse that morning, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened in the last 12 hours. She had signed the papers. She was divorced. She was in an apartment no one could find unless she told them where it was. She had a security desk downstairs. She had a legal team of 2 women. She had a hospital 3 blocks away. She had a stranger who had given her all of this, and who had asked, in return, only that she let him keep a promise to his mother. She began to cry. She cried on the floor of a kitchen she had not known existed 12 hours ago. She cried the way she had not cried in 5 years. Something that came up from the center of her body and moved through her in waves. Something that had been pressed down for so long it had forgotten what it looked like in the open. She cried until her throat hurt. She cried until the baby stilled, the way the baby sometimes stilled when it was listening. She sat up. She wiped her face. She carried the wrapped plate to the small dining table by the east window. She sat down, and she ate. She ate rice. She ate a small portion of grilled fish. She ate a spoonful of pickled radish because she had not eaten pickled radish in 5 years. He had not liked the smell of it in the refrigerator, and she had stopped buying it. And she had stopped buying a great many small things that she had loved, because losing the small things had become the price of keeping the peace. She ate a second spoonful. She cried again, briefly, because the pickled radish was the taste of a summer she had spent with her grandmother when she was 11, and because tonight she was sitting in a kitchen where she was allowed to taste anything she wanted. She finished the plate. She drank a glass of water. She walked to the bedroom. She lay down without changing her clothes, and she pulled the blanket to her shoulders, and she turned onto her left side, and she closed her eyes. Somewhere across the city, a man named Daesun Moon sat in a study and read a message from Junseo that said, "She is home." He set the phone down. He did not read any other messages that night. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell 3 days after Yeren moved into the apartment. A thin, powdery fall that dusted the railings of the building's small rooftop garden. The baby was born 11 days later. Her name was Sua. She was born in a hospital room that was quiet and warm. The labor had been long but uncomplicated. Hari had been in the waiting room. Yeren's mother had been in the room itself, because Yeren had made the phone call on the 3rd day after moving in, and her mother had taken the first train south the next morning. They had sat together in the living room for 6 hours that day, and there had been no speeches between them, only the plain and steady weight of a mother's hand in her daughter's. Her mother had stayed. She had slept in the second bedroom. She had made soup. In the evenings, she had sung very softly the songs Yeren's grandmother had sung when Yeren was small. When Sua was born, She weighed 3.1 kilograms. She had a full head of dark hair. She cried for 90 seconds after her first breath, and then stopped, and opened her eyes, and looked at her mother with the focused attention of a baby who had been listening for months and was now trying to match the face to the voice. Yaren laughed, the sound of a woman who had realized she was still alive. The paternity test, administered after the birth as agreed, confirmed what no one in the room had doubted. Her former husband did not contest custody. He did not contest because his own legal team had told him a contest would be futile, and because a conversation Dason had hinted at in the tea house had quietly taken place, not with her husband, with her husband's father, in an office on the other side of the city. Brief. The contract had been mentioned, the clause had been mentioned, and her husband's father had understood, with the speed of a man who had not arrived at his position by misreading rooms, that his son was going to sign the waiver of paternal rights within the week. Her husband had signed. The paperwork had been filed. The court had approved. The child's last name, on the birth certificate, was Shin. Yaren did not see her former husband again. In the months that followed, she rebuilt. She found freelance design work, slowly, through Suman, who had never stopped being her friend and who had connected her with a small publisher who needed book covers on a flexible schedule. She joined a support group for women who had left violent marriages. The group met Thursday evenings at a community center in the next district. Yaren went every week. She did not speak for the first 4 weeks. In the 5th week, she said one sentence. By the 3rd month, she was speaking in full paragraphs. By the 6th, she had told the whole story from beginning to end, not for the group, but for herself. Because the telling of it in full, in a room where other women nodded and did not interrupt, had turned out to be a form of medicine she had not known she needed. Her mother stayed for 3 months. Then her mother went home, because she had a life there, and a small garden and a church choir she had been part of for 20 years. Yaren drove her to the train station. They stood on the platform together in the cold spring wind. Her mother put her hand on Yaren's face and said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "You are your grandmother's granddaughter. You always were. I forgot to remind you." Then her mother had boarded the train. Yaren had driven home, and Sua had been waiting with the woman from the building who had offered, in the 2nd month, to sit with the baby when Yaren needed to run errands. Yaren had lifted Sua into her arms and had stood in the living room by the east window in the late afternoon light, and she had understood, without the understanding arriving as a thought, that she had become a woman who lived in her own home. Daesun did not visit. He had told her, the night Junseo had moved her into the apartment, that he would not visit, and he had kept his word. On the day Sua was born, a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums arrived at the hospital with a card that said only, "Welcome." On the day the paternity waiver was filed, a second note arrived that said, "You are safe. I am glad." On Sua's 100th day, a small silver spoon arrived, wrapped in blue silk, with a card that said, "This is for her to keep." That was all. The apartment remained paid for. The legal team remained on retainer. The medical arrangement remained active for the first 2 years of Sua's life, until Yaren, who by then was earning enough, wrote to Jiwon and asked for it to be discontinued, and it was discontinued without discussion. The apartment she kept. She had tried in the 2nd year to begin paying rent and had been told through Jiwon that the holding company did not accept rent from her, and that if she wanted to treat this as a debt, she could repay it by being well. She had decided to treat it as that. 3 years later, on a clear afternoon in early October, Yaren walked into Seonyoung's tea house with her daughter Sua holding her hand. Sua was 3 years old. She had her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's eyes and a small, serious way of walking that suggested she was paying attention to things most 3-year-olds did not bother to notice. She wore a yellow coat Yaren had bought for her 2nd birthday and that she had refused to outgrow. The bell above the door rang. Seonyung looked up from the counter. Her face moved in the way it moved when a very old friend walked through a door. She came around the counter and knelt down, slowly, her hands on her knees, and looked at Sua at eye level. "You must be Sua." "Yes." "Your mother told me you like the sweet rice cakes." "Yes. I made some this morning. Come to the back table." They walked to the back table, the same table Yeren had sat at 3 years ago. The same two chairs faced the door. The window beside the table showed the same alley, the same shop that sold embroidered handkerchiefs, the same shop that still sold nothing anyone could identify from the street. Yeren sat in the chair she had sat in 3 years ago. Swa climbed into the chair beside her, with a little help, and arranged herself on her knees so she could see over the edge of the table. Shonyung brought barley tea for Yeren and warm milk for Swa, and a small plate of sweet rice cakes dusted with pale yellow powder that Swa reached for immediately with both hands. "One at a time," Yeren said gently. "One at a time," Swa agreed, and selected one, and ate it with the deep concentration 3-year-olds bring to small pleasures. Yeren watched her daughter eat. She remembered the first Thursday night she had spoken at the support group, when she had said only, "My name is Yeren and I have a daughter and we are safe now." And one of the women in the circle had reached across and had squeezed her hand without speaking. She remembered the small design studio she had opened 6 months ago, a single room where she worked on book covers for 3 publishing houses. She remembered her mother teaching Swa how to fold a piece of colored paper into the shape of a crane. She remembered Su Min, who had become Sua's godmother and who came over every Sunday for dinner. She remembered Hari's card on Sua's second birthday that had said, "I have seen many cases end. Very few end this well. Be proud." And she remembered the man she had met in this tea house 3 years ago. She had not seen him. Not once. Not in the hospital. Not at the apartment. Not at any of the small points in the last 3 years when she had half expected, in a quiet part of herself, that he might appear. He had kept every promise, including the implicit one, which was that he would never ask her to see him again. She had sent him, through Jiwon, exactly 1 letter, 6 months after Sua was born. A single page. She had not thanked him, because she had understood by then that he did not want her thanks. What she had written was a description. The morning light in the east window. The first time Sua had smiled. The first time Sua had laughed. The pickled radish she ate now, freely, in her own kitchen. The humming she had started again while she cooked. She had ended the letter with one sentence. "She is loved, and so am I. And what your mother carried, my daughter will not." She had not received a reply. She had not expected one. Now, 3 years later, she drank her barley tea and watched her daughter choose a second sweet rice cake. Outside the window, a car passed slowly along the main street at the far end of the alley, a dark car. The unhurried quality of a car not on its way anywhere urgent. It passed the mouth of the alley, and it slowed briefly, and it continued on. Yeren could not see the driver. She could not see whoever was in the back seat. But for a moment, she thought she saw, through the slightly tinted rear window, the shape of a man in a charcoal coat sitting very still. She thought she saw him turn his head, very slightly, toward the tea house, as if he were confirming something, or as if he were simply passing by on an afternoon when he had happened to find himself on this street. The car moved on. It did not stop. It did not circle back. It disappeared around the corner, and the sound of its engine faded into the sounds of the city, and the alley went quiet again. Yeren did not say anything. She placed her hand gently on her daughter's back. Sua looked up at her mouth full of rice cake, her eyes bright. And she said in the small, clear voice she used when she was trying out a new word, "Mama, are you happy?" And Yeren, who had spent 5 years inside a marriage that had taught her to answer every question carefully, who had spent the last 3 years learning to answer questions plainly, looked down at her daughter and said, without thinking about it, without measuring it, without needing to count her breath, "Yes, Sua, I am." Sua nodded, satisfied, and returned her attention to the rice cakes. Seonyung refilled the tea from behind the counter without being asked. Somewhere across the city, in a study with a window that faced west, a man named Dason Moon set down a plain white envelope delivered to him that morning. The envelope contained a photograph, a small girl in a yellow coat, standing beside her mother on a sidewalk, holding her mother's hand. Taken without their knowledge, by a courier whose job was to confirm, twice a year, that all was well. Daesoon looked at the photograph for a long time. He placed it inside a wooden box on the corner of his desk, beside 2 other photographs that had arrived the same way in previous years. He stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the city in the late afternoon light, and he thought, for the first time in many months, of a small apartment in the city of Incheon, and of a woman named Mireille Moon, who had sat at a kitchen table when he was 17 years old and had told him she was tired. He said, very quietly, to no one, "She is not tired anymore." And he turned away from the window. The tea house in the alley continued its quiet afternoon. Sua finished her second rice cake and began negotiating, with the particular charm of 3-year-olds, for a third. Yeren laughed, and the laugh was ordinary now, a laugh that had become ordinary in a life that had become ordinary, and outside the window the light shifted from gold to a softer amber. They were safe. They had been safe for 3 years, and today, like every day that had come before it, was enough.